So welcome everyone to the Bruegel annual meetings, to this session today on the reception and integration of refugees from Ukraine. I mean, the darkest side of the war is what impact it has on people, and certainly people in Ukraine suffer the most. Many of them die, many of them have to flee their home. Everything they did during their life, their houses, their jobs might be destroyed. Let me just tell you a few numbers. I mean, as of today, about 12 million Ukrainians left the country, about 5 million returned, but still about 7 million is abroad. Within Ukraine, the number of people who was forced to move and leave their home has roughly the same number, close to 10 million. And of these 7 million people who still currently outside Ukraine, about 4 million of them requested temporary protection in the European Union. About 2.5 million of them are in Russia. If we see the scale of this asylum outflow from Ukraine, this is clearly unprecedented since the Second World War. For example, we can recall the 2015-2016 migration crisis, when a lot of Syrians and other people from that area entered the European Union. At that time, the largely monthly arrival of asylum seekers was 1,600 people. This time, there were a couple of days when 200,000 people arrived. So there were a couple of days this time when more people came within a single day than in any month during the 2015-2016 Ukrainian crisis. So clearly the scale of outflow of Ukrainian refugees is unprecedented in Europe. Now, luckily, the European Union nations very quickly recognized the grave situation, and they offered a lot of help for receiving those who were forced to flee Ukraine. The so-called Temporary Protection Directive, which, for example, provides these people access to healthcare, housing, accommodation, also to the labor market, only subject to local labor laws, have been activated, which was certainly very, very helpful. And the goal of this panel this morning is to discuss two main issues. There will be two rounds of discussion with the panelists, and after that, hopefully a discussion with the audience, both here physically and also online. In the first round, we would like to discuss the first few months of receiving Ukrainian refugees. So how did it go? Did it went well? What we should have done differently? What are the lessons? What are the costs? And in the second round, we would like to discuss a more longer-term perspective of what will happen to these people. We still do not know how long the war will last, how many refugees will remain in the European Union. But we cannot exclude that most of those who are already here might wish to stay longer. Also, so far, mostly women and children arrived. So once the war will end, the families will have to be reunited. Again, we do not know whether this family reunification will happen in Europe or refugees will go back to Ukraine and it will happen there. Nevertheless, there is a large probability that a large share of the refugees will remain in Europe for many, many years. And the main question, how to integrate such a very large number of people. So that will be the second round in our discussion. But first we will focus on reception, and I have a brilliant panel to discuss this issue. Now let me introduce yourself in alphabetic order. So Piotr Arak, who is the director and also the founder of the Polish Economic Institute, which is a very prestigious research institute in Poland. Then we will have Dajmen Bozalager, who will join us online. He is a member of the European Parliament and is also very active in migration issues. Then on my left, we have Carlo Monticelli. who is the governor of the Council of Europe Development Bank, which, among others, have lots of programs for supporting migrants and refugees. And finally, in the alphabetic order, Catherine Woolard, who is the director of European Council of Refugees and Exiles, which is an association of more than 100 NGOs helping refugees. So we really have an excellent group of experts to share their insights. I suggested that initially we go in alphabetic order in the first round. So let me start with Piotr, who is from Poland, the country received and still hosts the largest number of refugees. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Zsolt, for this invitation and the possibility to speak. This topic is for me very personal on many levels because my grandmother was Ukrainian. So on many occasions, I also see this war as a part of a war that of a country that I too come from in many ways. And this is the side of the difficult history that Central and Eastern Europe has, both on the borders of Belarus, Ukraine. You have families which are intertwined, Jewish, Polish, Belarusian, and Ukrainian. And that's why so many people have so complicated ancestry as to who they come and their families, and also very difficult relations with some of their counterparts living, for example, the Ukrainians living in Russia, or the Belarusians or Poles living in Belarus, because there are many of those as well, with a difficult situation, with a very authoritarian regime there, depriving of the minorities of their rights and citizens as well. But what I wanted to say is on the after the 24th of February, myself and many of the people were surprised. And I was surprised due to very complex history between Ukraine and Poland. This is like going back 60, 70 years, 80 years. This is a part of the war where you had also civil war between neighbors killing neighbors, as in the Balkan times. And this is why when we had such a big influx and a possibility of so many Ukrainians coming back, and this history is very lively debated and was debated on the political level for many years, it was very much surprising that so many Poles, having this deeply troubling past, decided to help Ukrainians. And this is why probably everybody read about that in the papers. So I'm just going to give you some numbers of a study that we conducted in order to give some data to this history. Is that 77% of Poles helped Ukrainian refugees coming to our country. And up to yesterday, there was more than 6 million people that passed the Polish border, going to different kinds of countries. They also went back and came back from Ukraine in some periods of the war. And up until 3 months later on, it was about half of the society, so 50% of adult Poles, still helping in some way. About 60% donated gifts, clothing, food, products, drove people on many occasions. 53% donated money. This is the easiest way, but also a lot of people did that. 20% helped refugees in some way. This is the providing cars. Many people, we had car jams and traffic jams near the Polish and Ukrainian border for many months, actually, because so many cars went to that place. And 17% volunteered. They helped the people coming to Warsaw and other bigger cities, provided food, managed the situation there, because nobody was ready for such a big influx of people coming to the country. And what is very tremendous is that 7% of Poles, and this might not see as a big number, but 7% translates to a couple of 100,000 houses, provided their houses, their apartments, and their flats to the refugees coming to Poland. Mainly women and children, also the elderly. That's why on a large scale, Poland did not have any refugee camps needed to be established. Some institutions were adapted, schools, also commercial centers, malls in some places near the bigger cities. But they weren't used for the whole time. And many of the refugees, and this is one of the most important elements of this story, started to work. And from the more than 1 million people who registered with the Polish authorities, giving their IRS number, so their number of, as each citizen or inhabitant of Poland has, they are allowed to use mainly all of the social security services, education, as a citizen of Poland, and for some period of time they also had the possibility to get additional financing, wasn't high, and free public transportation for the first 3 months. So something more that even a citizen of the country has the right to in Poland, for which the far-right groups criticized the authorities in Poland. But I guess that was a very good decision. When I don't know if a refugee can know how to buy a ticket in a foreign country, so it's kind of a good decision to be made. And about 40% of the refugees, mainly women, started working, and this from this group of people that came to Poland. And this is also shows the adaptability of the people coming in, and also the preparedness of the labor market, because Poland, after the Donbas war broke out in 2014, saw an influx of economic, not refugees per se as they are now, but also people coming from the eastern part of Ukraine wanting to start over in our country or in our neighboring countries. And this created almost a group of 1.5, 1.8 million pre-war Ukrainians living in Poland, and currently probably a group of 3 million people or more, because we don't know, we have a free movement of people, so we don't know how many people are actually within our country, 3 million of Ukrainians in Poland. Yeah, that's probably a good start off.
It's absolutely interesting, and I would certainly like to come back to the labor market, as you said that 40% of them were able to start to work. But first, I just wonder whether our guest from Mr. Bozalaga from the Parliament is with us online or not.
I'm here, yes.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. So then can you please share your view as a member of the Parliament working on the Ukraine situation? How do you see the first few months, how European institutions responded? Did it go well? What should have been done differently?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and sorry I can't be there in person. So I just came back, or just came back is maybe said too much, but I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago, and I mean, obviously we will now talk about the situation of Ukrainians in the EU, but I just wanted to quickly share that I was very impressed by how they deal with internally displaced people, which is also obviously a huge challenge in a country that is war-torn and where the economy is in free fall, you can almost say. And second, obviously, I was very impressed by the determination that the Ukrainian people showed actually when it came to joining the European Union and for fighting also against the Russians. And so this is just a mini impression from my side. But I mean, a lot has been said of what we can see and what we can learn from these first months. But I just wanted to also say that for me, it's a personal and institutional success, I think. Like personal, because a lot of people individually helped to actually accommodate and to welcome people. And I think it's especially Poland is super impressive when it comes to this, and institutionally, because we managed to trigger the Temporary Protection Directive for the first time. And I think it has shown that it works and that it is a huge alleviation on our systems, and especially obviously for the people that were fleeing the war. And so I think that should be mentioned. But obviously what happens if you, if you want to jump the asylum system is that you get into bottlenecks later on. So very often I think in our system, asylum is the bottleneck, and then integration can somehow follow after. But obviously this led to a huge influx into all the following steps. And some of them have been mentioned, obviously entering the job market, education, housing, healthcare. And here I would also underline the psychosocial aspects that are obviously especially to be looked at, but also just as simple as something as simple as getting a bank account. So I think when it comes to this, we can see that our systems are still not 100% ready to deal with such a huge influx of people. And I think a lot has been done, but a lot more needs to be done to also institutionally ensure that this is that people have access to these following the asylum system, if you want. And what I think the last thing that I want to say is that I found it very impressive how local authorities and smaller NGOs especially also helped in making this all work, in addition to the individuals that just welcome people in their houses. But that we don't really, from the European level, yet have the right channels to fund funds in these directions. So when it comes to NGOs, local NGOs, and when it comes to local authorities, I have the feeling that a lot needs to be done. We're looking into this. I know also that Commissioner Johansson looked into it. And I mean, we have, 1 billion from the CARE program. We have 10 billion from REACT-EU. We have, the emergency assistance under the AMIF. And there is definitely some funds. But I think when it comes to understanding how we can actually support in a crisis situation where it's needed most, and that is on the local level, I think there's a lot to learn from the European Parliament's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Taiman. As you said, there's a lot to learn. So we hopefully be able to draw those lessons maybe in the second round. But let's first continue with Carlo Monticelli, who is the governor of a development bank. So how can your and other development banks help, all this process of supporting Ukraine refugees in Europe?
Thank you for having me here, and good morning to everybody. Now, the overarching theme that we have just heard in the intervention by two previous speakers is solidarity. There was really a massive display of solidarity across different institutions, and this feature also applies to multilateral development banks, where we've been helping out, providing financing, really working together. In this common reaction and support, the Council of Europe Development Bank had a special role to play, given two special features that makes it different from the other multilateral development banks. The first one is the fact that we are the only development bank with a unique mandate, because it has the only focus on social investment, with a particular attention to migration. Indeed, the bank itself was established 67 years ago to take care of refugees. The second aspect is that we are the only multilateral bank being able to provide quickly targeted grants. And this is what we did to cope with the humanitarian emergencies that were unavoidably associated with such mass movements of people. And we worked together with organization being active in the field, from NGOs to the International Organization on Migration. For example, with one of our grants, green corridor was established along the Moldavian border to facilitate the entry. We helped out migrants refugees, displaced persons that were flying away from the work, for example, to just buy train tickets to reunite with their family. But in addition to this emergency support, we were very active in providing fast-track financing to help states and local communities to respond. We have issued very quickly a loan of 450 million to Poland. We have granted a 250 million loan to the state Development Bank of North Rhine-Westphalia, providing the resources to have accommodation and emergency measures for the refugees. I would like to conclude this first round of comments just flagging the fact that the Council of Europe Development Bank has been also active in showing solidarity on the liability side of the balance sheet, so to speak. Of course, for our action, like all the multilateral development banks, we tap international financial markets to get the resources for our activities. And this year we have issued 2 sustainable bonds just devoted to getting the financing to help out with the issue of refugees from Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting that you described it, fast-track financing for local authorities. I presume it was very well appreciated. And now let's me turn to Catherine, who is representing NGOs. So far, the 3 speakers were rather positive, and there are many positive aspects. But let me also try to push you a bit as a more independent thinker, and what should have been done differently?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to make 3 points at this stage, and I will in fact start with the challenges. And my comments are based on what we hear from our members working across Europe, particularly those in the countries where there are the largest populations of Ukrainians, so Poland, Czech Republic, Romania and so on, but also across Europe now. Many countries are dealing with large numbers of people fleeing Ukraine. So my first point would be that there are immense practical challenges ongoing. That is partly due to the numbers. This is a major humanitarian emergency that's taking place in Europe. And we see all the kind of challenges that are characteristic of humanitarian emergencies. These are the immediate need to provide shelter, food, etc., but also issues like coordination problems among the different responders, and the question of risk of exploitation and trafficking. And the challenges, I think, are exacerbated due to the vulnerability of this population of displaced people. As we've seen, over 90% are women and children who've left Ukraine. And this derives partly from the nature of the conflict. So the conflict is rather atypical when it comes to contemporary conflict. It's an irredentist conflict with an invasion followed by a defensive reaction, which has led to conscription. So therefore we see the difference in terms of the demographics of the population fleeing. Males of fighting age are obliged to stay and fight. And among the refugees, the high numbers of vulnerable populations, women, children, disabled people, people with pre-existing vulnerabilities, high levels of mental health problems pre-existing. And that means in the housing and reception point, the risks of exploitation are higher. And I would then say a challenge derives also from the very varied capacity within European states to respond. And this is a displacement crisis taking place in a rich part of the world. And that means all the responders defer to the states. So unlike in a situation in displacement in Horn of Africa, for instance, where there would be a predominant role from international organizations, here it's the states that are in the driving seat, rightly, but their capacity and their institutional ability to respond varies hugely. My second point is the positive one, and this is that in response to this crisis, the response of Europe has been greatly enhanced by the political decisions that have been made. We've seen positive political decisions throughout. Initially, the decision was taken to manage this crisis. And when the decision is taken to manage, we see that the EU can manage. Unlike previous displacement crises, where we went through a period of disunity, conflict, panic, paralysis, and the constant refrain that we could not manage. Different in this case, and that included the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive, which has been essential. That means that rather than people being blocked in status determination, seeking a protection status is automatic. They can move directly to questions of housing, socioeconomic rights, integration. Let me conclude with my third and final point, which is the question of the challenges now. I think above all, it's about trying to move out of this phase of emergency relief humanitarian operation and into something that is long-term structural support, because many millions of Ukrainians will be displaced for the long term. They don't want to be, they want to go back like all refugees do, but it's just not feasible. So transitioning out is a key element. Keeping political and public support is absolutely crucial. And then we would add, looking at the impact on the wider asylum system is also something extremely important. This is a temporary protection regime for people fleeing Ukraine. Immense practical challenges, but positive political decisions. Within the asylum system as a whole, we see multiple dysfunctions, but we also see an opposite political response. And we have reforms on the table now that go in the exact opposite direction of the Ukraine response. So there needs to be a rethinking of the approach to wider questions of asylum and migration policy, and how do we take some of the positive experiences from the Ukraine response, notwithstanding the immense practical challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, also for clearly highlighting the upcoming challenges, like transitioning out of the current state when there is a temporary protection, which can be extended up to 3 years. But also keeping public support is absolutely important, and I'm also grateful you mentioned that there would be also a more broader approach to European asylum system. So this leads perfectly to our second round of issues, namely on how to integrate those people who came as refugees from Ukraine in the more medium term. Now, Piotr, you already mentioned that 40% of please clarify whether it's the total 40% or 40% of adults, but they already...
Adults, of
okay.
The adults which are registered, so okay. It's not of the... because almost half are children, and the other 7% pitch points are the elderly, which also okay.
Yeah. So this is a great news that 40% of adults have already started to work. Nevertheless, I think also for the labor market integration, there could be a couple of issues. I mean, first of all, qualifications, how to recognize qualifications which were earned in Ukraine. I mean, if a doctor drives a taxi, it's better than she doesn't do anything else, but clearly, I mean, what would be preferable is to allow people to do their profession. They studied for years also within Europe. I think that's one critical issue. Another critical issue could be, just, the number of jobs. I mean, if there are, currently 4 million refugees at the moment in Europe, of, let's say, half of them adults, 2 million, how to create suddenly 2 million jobs to offer to these people? I think that can also be a major challenge. So now let me ask your views on how to integrate those people, and also more on the policy side, what policymakers should do. I mean, again, Catherine, you rightly mentioned that Europe is a group of rich states, rich nations, when even Poland is a relatively rich country compared to elsewhere, I mean, countries elsewhere in the world. But let me also broaden to the European dimension, whether there would be need for further European support measures to help integration. Now let me start with you, Carlo, if I can.
Oh, okay. The first thing that we have to acknowledge is the huge uncertainty that we have about numbers. We don't know how the military conflict would evolve, how many people at the end of the day will decide to stay for a long term outside Ukraine. What we know anyhow is that the numbers will be high. So this phase of transitioning and integration is absolutely crucial to allow an integration that is respectful of the needs of refugees while limiting the tensions in the receiving country. To allow that, I would see 3 vectors of action that must be considered, while bearing all the time in mind that there is no perfect solution. And indeed, action in these 3 areas will have to be tailored to the specific situation. The first area of intervention is to enhance the provision of social services. This is the bread and butter of the Council of Europe Development Bank, but it is just based on common sense the first action to undertake. And social services, I just mean the basics: education, health, social housing. And we want to have the number of people in a community is larger. So we want to make sure that these services are provided to accommodate this larger amount of population. And indeed, studies have shown that this part is absolutely crucial to allow really the welcoming of the migrants or the refugees. The second vector of intervention is the integration in labor market. And we are talking about big numbers. This is the issue to stress. The OECD has put forward a tentative estimate of 0.5% of the European labor force, really a massive inflow. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that in many countries we have a structural shortage of labor. So this is a welcome labor supply. This is not a situation in all countries, and this is where policies come into play, and this is where, as Catherine was saying, it is important to have policies at the national level that facilitate these processes. Then we have the training of language, and then we have the important, absolutely crucial part of recognizing the competencies. And I would like just to flag to you a very important initiative on this front that has been spearheaded and launched by the Council of Europe, which is the European Qualification Passport, which is exactly the exercise where there is a testing of the competencies that then allows this passport to be issued and then used. The third important vector of action is the coordination of intervention at the national and local levels. These are issues that are certainly benefiting from a Europe-wide approach, but a lot of integration policies at the end of the day boil down to active intervention at the national level, but also at the local level. Ultimately, it's the local communities that bear the brunt. And we have seen in many circumstances now in the emergency report an excellent collaboration. I have in mind Poland and Warsaw, where we have witnessed an excellent cooperation on this front, despite the fact that the political color of the two administrations is different. And this is an example where this coordination worked, and the Council of Europe Development Bank is quite active in fostering this cooperation between national and local level, providing not only financing at both levels, but also advisory services.
Excellent. I mean, all 3 points you raise are absolutely important. Just let me come back to a quick clarifying question on this European qualification passport, which is a very interesting idea. So how does this currently apply to Ukrainian refugees,
Well,
and how much time it will take to include even more people?
Well, this is based on so it's a program that is just starting, and for the time being is as yet fairly little known, and is based on migrants requiring this passport, and then there is a process testing the skills that are needed. Now the testing part is trying to be is in the process of being standardized to enhance recognition in all Council of Europe member states, and the next step will be to have a more proactive use of the instrument, advertising it more, and possibly creating local centers where this passport is issued.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you very much. Now, Piotr, Poland, which so far has about 1.4 million Ukrainian who applied for this temporary protection, how do you see their more medium and longer term integration?
Yeah, and this is the most difficult part probably, because when you have this ad hoc solution and also this crisis at hand, war, it's easier for a lot of people to just not go to work and go to the border, and this is basically what happens. Some companies to operate in a different way. But to have it as a sustainable measure, you need the state to put in, and this is basically what has to happen through the next months and through the next probably years to come. You need to work on education. This is the biggest challenge. We have a lot of children coming into the Polish education system with a different education system in Ukraine, different language, not so many teachers with the knowledge of Ukrainian, and then the possibility of those kids to adapt, integrate, willing, is it going to be permanent or not, for them to learn Polish and then integrate in the Polish education system. And this is basically one of the most difficult tasks for the whole authorities. One thing that that is helping, and I'm here giving from a negative, I'm trying to put a positive, is that because of the baby bust through the last years, we have still higher number of educators and teachers in the system, and fewer and fewer kids going to schools. So basically it means that there are more people in the schooling system ready to take on bigger classes, and the kids that can go to the system. The education system is in a lot of trouble. I'm just saying that there's some capacity in it that typically wouldn't be possible in a different country, but because of the baby bust, it's somehow there. Another element which I already pointed out is about the labor market, and this happened for a lot of years. So we saw a lot of Ukrainians coming into Poland to work, Belarusians as well, and some other from other countries from the Commonwealth of Independent States, so Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and others to Poland. And because of labor shortages, almost all-time high employment rate in Poland, and in some age groups, it's basically like in the Nordics, 90-something% of employment in the ages of 20 to 50% to 50 years. Means that with a 2.6% unemployment rate, Poland is, with Czech Republic, with the lowest unemployment rate in the European Union. We have basically the scarcity of labor is the crucial issue. The economy was running hot in the last year and at the beginning of this year, creating the tensions for a higher inflation rate given the energy crisis. But it also means that we have a possibility of 700 to 800,000 vacancies in the labor market at this current stage. And this is in the service sector, construction, production. Poland is a production economy. We have a high chunk of industry as a part of the value added produced. So it's still factory workers can find work within the economy. But these who came, they weren't factory workers, but that could also happen. So the adaptability of the labor market probably is there. There's the mismatch between the qualifications of the people, and please, they're not migrants, they're refugees, so that's not the first thing they think, is to find a job in a different country. And I was always saying that to many experts since the beginning of war, it's not a great chance for the labor market. Please let those people adapt to the situation, then they can find a job. And given the high number of those who started working, this is more than 400,000, almost 400,000, sorry, this 370,000 last week. It means that there's a lot of possibility, and probably the biggest element binding the two countries, meaning Poland and Ukraine, because Poland has the largest labor market in Central Europe, and this is the same situation for Slovak and Czech Republic or Hungary, is that there's a big similarity between the languages. Mm-hmm. And I know because I'm learning Ukrainian, and it's fairly similar to kind of Old Polish language for me. This is how Ukrainian sounds. You have the different letters, but the communication is easy at some point. So the adaptation of a person coming to the Polish labor market is a lot different than when he goes, I don't know, to Germany or to a different country, because there is still this possibility to communicate without knowing the language. Then you need to learn the letters. And then if you're a nurse, you can become a medical assistant, basically straight off, not a nurse, but still work at a hospital, private hospital or a public hospital. And if you're a doctor, amendments to law will be made in order for the Ukrainian doctors to be accepted by the Polish authorities, self-government doctor authorities, which were not that keen to open the labor market for doctors, as they are everywhere across in each country, because we also have a shortage of doctors. So the medical professionals probably could quite easily get into the labor market, but there are some obstacles on the way. For other professionals, it's also easy. I would say we employ a Ukrainian economist. He started 2 months ago. We had economist refugees coming from Ukrainian authorities who also wanted to start work in different institutions. Some of them decided to go even further west to Canada because of the possibilities of Canada opening their borders, and also a group of migrants being in that country. But I guess that the biggest obstacle would be if the labor market wasn't that open. And currently it is, and this is what creates a lot of opportunities for those people. And the crucial element is, of course, the bottlenecks within the public institutions, the education system, health system, which is currently working over capacity, because there's a big number of additional inhabitants, which nobody was thinking of when they were designing institutions and the budgets for them.
Many thanks. Let me also have a quick follow-up questions to you on the labor, on the employment of these 3,070,000 people, as you mentioned, already found a job. So do you have any information whether they found a job which is at their qualification that they had in Ukraine, or whether they had to move down? For example, you mentioned doctors and nurses, but I can presume it might not be easy to employ a doctor coming from Ukraine, saying, look, I have a diploma in medicine, whatever university, I want to work as a doctor from tomorrow. It can't be that just easy.
Yeah. So, of course, it's in most migrant cases, as in with each crisis, they employ under qualification. So they do tasks or are employed in, for example, if somebody is with higher education, is employed in the service sector, restaurants or... But the one interesting part of this crisis, and we're actually doing a paper on that, and we're digging deep into Ukrainian business, because lots of Ukrainian businesses reopened in Poland after the start of war, and this is also people with higher qualifications wanting to do something. Also, some services for the Ukrainians living in Poland, because this is we have Ukrainian radio now in Warsaw. So there are different kinds of possibilities that this crisis creates, and I guess probably the most interesting will be connected with business operations deep behind the lines of the conflict. Because Ukraine is still fighting, it still needs economic assistance, but still has an economy operating, with some cooperation of its partners and donor countries, but it also has during the last years the remittances of the employees working in Poland and in other Western countries were quite high, and increasing the national product within Ukraine. So it also means that this network of migrants working, employing, doing business also is kind of helping the Ukrainian families which are staying in that country. One of the biggest problems at the beginning of the war was the exchange rate of the Ukrainian hryvnia to Polish zloty and to euros, because this is currently not a free-floating currency, and there had to be a fixed rate estimated of the Polish Central Bank, cooperation with the Ukrainian Central Bank, and of the commercial and state-owned banks in Poland, in order for those people to basically have money to buy anything in shops. And there were lots of concerns also connected, as in the Balkan Wars, with money laundering, because this is also happening, and there's also a concern about that. Not only good people migrate and are refugees, so we also need to remember that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's also an important thing to keep in mind. Now, Catherine, can I turn to you on
Yes.
a little bit on the more broader issue, how to transition from this temporary protection directive to a more settled regime?
Yes, I think when we're talking about integration, there's again the two sides, the positive elements, reasons to be positive, and then immense challenges. And in terms of the positive side, it really is the TPD that is crucial. Having activated this instrument, this directive that exists for the first time since, activated for the first time, a directive which exists since 2001, this means that people fleeing Ukraine have protection status. And in work on integration, one of the key principles that we argue for is integration from day one. And frequently that's not possible because people are so tied up in trying to get a protection status. And they may be waiting months, even years, before having the resolution of an asylum application. So here, for the first time in a way, the idea of integration from day one can be applied. In addition, the elements that facilitate integration, there's a huge amount of evidence on this. These are factors including security of legal status. So if people don't have a status, if they have precarious, limited term legal status, then integration becomes much more of a challenge, because an employer is less likely to employ somebody if they have only 6 months right of residence, for instance. So here we see positive prospects. Access to socioeconomic rights is a crucial factor. Again, the TPD provides for quite comprehensive content of protection, a set of socioeconomic rights for the people that are part of this temporary protection regime. And then family and community links are also important. And in this case, we also see a different approach to the usual one, as onward movement is supported, indeed it's even encouraged, and family reunification, which is often a huge struggle for refugees and indeed for other migrants, is actually being facilitated. So for the Ukrainian population, the prospects for integration are greater, even before we come to the factors that have already been mentioned, such as language, which are also important. When we look, the next step will be access to those socioeconomic rights that are provided for under the TPD. And to understand how that happens, I think it has to get to the national level, and it has to be broken down by right. So the questions of housing are very different to the questions of labour market access. If we're talking about housing, across most of Europe there are housing shortages. This means that Ukrainians accessing this right is more of a challenge, and it risks creating tension with the local populations if not properly handled. As we've heard, when it comes to the right to employment, labour market access, which is also guaranteed for Ukrainians, the situation is the opposite, because every country in Europe has labour shortages. There are even countries whose very future is at risk due to absence of labour. So accessing that right for Ukrainians is a very different situation. And you can break it further down. Education depends on the situation in the country concerned, healthcare, challenges as well as needs. So I won't go into more detail there. Let me just add a final element in terms of challenges. To switch to a long-term structural response, the whole of society has to be engaged. So the response from civil society has been extremely positive, both organised civil society, but also just ordinary people, responding, hosting people. Maintaining that support in the long term is a major challenge, and we've seen this with previous displacement crises, that you have an initial wave of generosity and huge numbers of volunteers. Many of our members experienced that in 2015, 2016, but then you have to transition into motivating these people over the long term and maintaining their activities in an organised way, which can be a challenge. We also have a particular challenge in a number of the countries most affected are countries where, to put it frankly, governments have been attacking and repressing civil society in recent years, including countries in the EU. This also includes things like dismantling the infrastructure for integration, because these governments don't want civil society engaged in integration. We have certain governments in Europe that have a policy of no integration. I can name and shame in the questions if you want. It's not the most obvious ones always, but that's the case. So some of that needs to be reversed. There needs to be a rebuilding of trust between the society and the groups that are responsible for integrating people and the governments. In terms of the EU side, we would say up until now the response of the European Commission to this crisis has been impeccable. Impeccable. We never say that about the European Commission response on asylum and migration issues. It has been entirely positive, pragmatic, maintaining unity, using all the instruments available, encouraging member states to respect the law, etc. That needs to be maintained, and the management of the huge amount of money going in also needs to be managed in a responsible way by the EU institutions. As a final element that I think is like a joker card thrown into this is the question of granting accession candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova. And the accession model is going to be challenged by everything that's going on. I mean, usually one of the carrots offered to countries is free movement. Ukrainians have free movement across the EU right now already. So that, I think, is an additional element. Who will be the driving force and the key interlocutor from the institution side?
That's excellent, really. Thank you very much for the many great points on the challenges we will face in the coming months and years, and especially your point that the Commission had a very pragmatic response which should be maintained. Very nicely leads to Diamond, the final contributor to this second round of question. So Diamond, my question to you is, how should the European Parliament and more general European institutions foster the medium and longer term integration of Ukrainian people, refugees in Europe?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I mean, as has been mentioned, a lot is also national level response that we need to look at. So, I mean, obviously the European Union doesn't have competences on all the elements relevant for integration, but I think a lot can be done. I'm still thinking about Catherine's point about EU accession. Obviously, that is, in the long term, a completely different kind of relationship that we could have with Ukraine at some point at the end, obviously, as just being a member state. So that gives a bit different perspective, I think, on this conflict and also on the question of integration than in other places. So I'm just digesting that point, which I found very interesting. I mean, a lot has been said. I think if I go through what the European Union can do, I mean, in all EU programs, funds are getting short just because of the fact that obviously the MFF was designed before the inflation and energy price increase, but obviously also before it was clear that there would be such a huge group of people coming to the European Union. And so I think that it's clear that no matter if you look at cohesion funds or social funds or whatever kind of funds that we are now using also to help integration, there will be more needed, and that it will be a bigger discussion that is anyways going on here on the question of, is the current MFF sufficient? Do we need to think about other kinds of sources of funding, be it the Next Generation EU2 or anything else that we can think of? So that's definitely, I think, one thing that we need to take into account and further look into. When it comes to education, what I just found interesting is that obviously if you talk to the officials in Ukraine, for them let's say the fact that people are not in Ukraine right now should be a temporary thing, and they see it as an opportunity of a lot of people making contacts in the rest of the European Union, and basically just a social bond being strengthened between the EU countries and Ukraine. But many of them would like their people also to come back, as have been a lot of people coming back already. And so I think that would be an interesting question, that if you look at education, for example, begs the question of whether there would be afternoon and evening hours digital schooling for these kids, and how this will affect integration and so on. When it comes to the economic point, I also here fully agree with what has been said before. I think it will be very interesting to assess what kind of different integration possibilities exist, just because you didn't have that months of waiting for an asylum status. The fact that you mentioned that there are businesses opening in Eastern Poland, for example, that are just basically doing the same that they did in Ukraine, obviously builds on the fact that they were still plugged into their networks, into their skill sets, into basically their whole job life. So it was easy for them to just start up a new company that does the exact same thing on the other side of the border. So I think there is a huge benefit from that we can look into further. And I'll come to what that means also in terms of application to other crises in a second. But I think that's an important point, to not jeopardize that. I think it's absolutely clear that we need to ensure that whatever kind of statuses or titles and residency titles follow after, we need to make sure that there's a seamless process into the normal asylum system, and that there's a seamless process into any form of long-term residence status that you could potentially get. I think that's something that we definitely need to ensure. And then when it comes to how do you bring the rest of the people into work that are currently not having a job yet? I mean, 2 years ago, I proposed the talent pool, EU talent pool, as a matching platform for skills and basically, trying to match people who want to work in the European Union and the open jobs that we have. And the European Commission has taken that up and proposes to apply this for Ukrainians first. So I'm closely following the pilot project that's going on there, that is supposed to match exactly the skills that we have on the one side with the labor market needs. I think a lot can be done even without legislation. If you look at the qualifications assessment, if you had a bit better collaboration between the European countries, and I mean, the qualification passport is one idea, but I think there are many ideas of how to basically ease access into the labor market, where we can learn a lot still. So this is all that we are currently, I think, already looking into. I do believe that there's a big learning also, obviously, for the whole asylum system. And I mean, I know it's a utopia, but like the idea that we would actually allow people to get their status extremely fast and then enter the labor market with their relevant job experience still being there, and their connections and ideas still being there, I think is something that we should never stop to strive for, because we can see how positive that is. And that obviously also means that we need to address our housing market shortages and find ways to ease qualifications and skills. And so that, I mean, the typical problems that or the challenges that we see, I think are just exacerbated here because it worked in one way so well already. So I think there's a lot to learn from, and a lot still that we need to do. I hope that it also inspires some form of willingness to look at our asylum system again. I mean, I'm also negotiating the crisis and force majeure regulation, which would replace the temporary protection status with something similar. And so I think I hope we can get some new energy into these asylum and migration files as a whole from that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I very much share your hope that indeed this will inspire a new asylum approach in Europe. Now, our session is coming near to the end, but I would like to take some questions. And there was a question that, Daiman, I would like to ask from you from online, and I will open the floor for a few questions from the audience. Namely, Katrina W. asked whether there should be an equitable distribution of refugees in the EU, Ukrainian or not, given it puts a lot of stress on border countries that are already struggling. So what's your take on that?
I think, I mean, equitable is a good question. I think we definitely need some form of an allocation key. I saw it in 2015, and in Germany we had this allocation key, which was not really official, but it was just, you know, beds available, and I think it worked quite well. And I mean, in the group that I sit with, the Greens, we have also proposed how, like, some form of a voluntary solidarity system could work, and how we could have an allocation key that would work. And I think what's really important to take into account is not only you know, the capacities that exist in the different member states and the solidarity that would then have to be mandatory in the different member states, but also the interests and family ties and so on of the people that are migrating. And I mean, Catherine has mentioned it, obviously the questions of family reunification or, you know, integration get eased a lot if you have the chance to just go where you want to go in the European Union. So we should think about not only, you know, whether we need some form of mandatory allocation key, but also how to take the preferences of the people that are migrating into account.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps I could say a word on that?
Yeah, please.
I think it's essential, as the questioner asks, for more even distribution of people seeking protection across the EU, because the numbers of people arriving due to Ukraine, but even before Ukraine, these are manageable numbers, but Europe can only manage if there's a fair and even distribution of people. Again, we see the Ukraine crisis as like upside down world. It's the complete opposite of the normal situation, because for Ukrainians, people have been allowed to move essentially where they want. There's freedom of movement for that group of refugees. And I think it should break the taboo that we have in the asylum system, which tries to limit people's movement and contain them to the countries at the border, because we see actually there's an advantage in allowing people to move on. They don't all go to the same places, and it enhances family reunification. Unfortunately, the reform proposals on the table go in the opposite direction by increasing the responsibility of the countries at the borders and proposing a model of detention in centres at the borders. So we see actually when there is a real crisis, a different approach works.
Very, very clear points.
If I may just to chip in on this with a small point about people preferences, and there, what I want to stress is that it's not only an issue of family reunion, but really just joining communities that were already there, and this is, you know, a constant in history and places of diasporas community being created, and these are very often the first point of entry, and refugees are quite happy to stay there as opposed to other places.
And it's also about labour market. I mean, there's a whole variety of factors we see, yeah.
Very, very good point. Now, are there any questions from the people here? So if you can get the mic, please. So please briefly introduce yourself and try to have a very short question if possible.
I'm Ruth Passaman, Director for Funds Implementation in DG Employment in the European Commission, and therefore responsible for the Social Fund, and also been working on making it easier to use the Social Fund for the integration of refugees. But I'm from the integration in the labor market, so the longer term, the second part of your panel. So first of all, I wanted to say, I want to pick up a few points that were made. First of all, at European level, we have created what we call ESCO, which is the European System of Skills, Qualifications and Occupation, which is basically a dictionary which allows comparison of qualifications also, and since June also for Ukrainian qualifications. So that's the first step. Second, I think there has been, I would just want to point out that indeed a lot of Ukrainians don't want to stay, they want to go back, and the family unification is a key point because their husbands and brothers are fighting. And this has also led some countries to make choices in, for example, to have Ukrainian language classes, which is I mean, it's normally something we don't want. We are always looking for integration. But in this particular case, where you know, especially at the beginning, we thought the war could be short, it actually was a good idea. So I think there is a real fundamental decision on whether to go for the full integration or rather to maintain, you know, the possibility to go back. And education is a key aspect of this, of course. I mean, because the integration of children is a fundamental aspect. On labor markets, I think there has been labor shortages everywhere, which makes it easier also to accept refugees. But we are going towards a recession, that's clear. Yeah. There's going to be lots of companies closing because of the high energy prices. So I wonder whether all this solidarity will continue in a phase of job losses. And third point, I'm sorry, no, I just think that the housing aspect has been, and thank you for mentioning it because I think it is the point which has not been considered. So I don't know if anyone else wants to intervene on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yeah, the gentleman over there. Just there.
Last week, Klingdal presented a report with different scenarios, one with more refugee influx, one with a longer conflict. Do you think that we are resilient as an EU or member states to cope with that on a longer term and to cope with the consequences of a longer term conflict? And yeah, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Yeah, there are two more. Pauline, just here.
Hi, I am Pauline, an analyst at Bruegel, and I have just two short questions. The first one, building on the question that was just asked, is maybe on the political risk aspect of integration in the sense of, for instance, the temporary directive that had not been enabled so far was because some countries strictly blocked it for all the during all the refugee crisis since we had since 2001, and so to what extent do you see a political risk there of just the mood changing in the years to come? And the second question is a bit broader than integration in the EU, but just on the humanitarian crisis that Ukrainians are facing more in general. So far, I think UNHCR numbers show that the countries hosting the most refugees is actually Russia. And I was wondering if you have any explanation on this, given anecdotal evidence of involuntary transfers, which I guess are not all in these semi-official numbers. So, thanks.
Thank you. And the last question over there.
Christophe Coyote from Bruegel. I have a question.
I'm not sure. I'm losing track.
Hi, Christophe Coyote from Bruegel. I have a question. A friend of mine is from Ukraine, and she left Ukraine and her business, but the business was destroyed during the war. And she's not able to rebuild it as for now. And she's in Poland right now. And I'm wondering if after the war, they will have a political economic support to create the business again in Ukraine. Because
Thank you, Christophe. Now, we are getting over time, so I would like to ask each of you to respond very, very briefly to just one or 2 points you would like to do. Maybe.
Yeah, well, let me address the issue of resilience. That has many components, many aspects. The first one, of course, is of a political nature. Europe is being faced with a new situation, and it will have to cope with it. The other element is to make sure that there is this political element that is translated into policies going in the direction consistent with this challenge. And the third point is one of having institutions also of an international nature that help just implementing these policies. And of course, I have in mind the help that an institution like mine can put forward just in terms of easing the financing of the necessary measure to sustain resilience.
Thank you very much. Piotr?
Okay, so going to go very briefly. Housing, very difficult. I forgot about that. It's a tremendous issue, both for Poland and for other countries. The housing issue is increasing the prices of housing, even though we're going into a slowdown in the case of Poland, not a full recession. But it's a real issue. Also, the costs of rent are increasing because also the refugees are taking in, as they become employed, they increase the prices of rent because of the scarcity of housing available in apartments in the bigger cities. That's a big issue, not easy to be tackled short term. No quick fix for that. Long-term conflict, it's the basic scenario for most of the Polish foreign affairs and military analysts. I'm no expert here, but I understand this is what we're going to go through. This means, in economic terms, sustain economic and first military, then economic assistance to Ukraine, dividing the country into groups of regions which need different kinds of assistance, and sustaining the economy of Ukraine going through this period of time, not for the country to go bust, so that after some kind of peace agreement or sustained no war, basically, time happens, as with the Koreas, there is going to be a possibility of private investors coming to Ukraine at some period of time. So this is the basic scenario, as far as I know. The number of refugees coming to Russia, as it's being stated, is also kind of challenging to understand, because in the east, Russia was also a route of migration in the 90s and in previous times when Ukraine was a member of the Soviet Union. So the migration and diaspora network of Ukrainians is still very big in Ukraine. And there are family issues when brothers are actually on different sides, or sisters on different sides of the war, being Ukrainians themselves. One's fed with Russian and Putin's propaganda, and the other ones living now in Poland or in Ukraine. So this is a big issue, and Russia also displaced people as they did 100 years ago, using wagons and trains. So people going to Siberia, basically, as they did 100 years ago.
Thank you very much. Catherine, a
Yes.
few words? Just
Let me respond on a couple of the points. In terms of integration, and there's very interesting points here, I think we need to try new approaches on some of this as well. So one element is how to ensure that people maintain status even if they're coming in and out of the country, because the status is key to integration, as I mentioned before, but we have a very different pattern here where people are moving in and out. In terms of education, I think there's already some counterintuitive evidence that for minority communities, having education partially in your own language actually enhances outcomes. So what we might see is useful learning with the Ukrainian children that can be more widely applied, particularly for communities where there's a risk of dropout, that partly learning in your own language or the language of the family doesn't actually hinder integration in the way that we might think. Final point on conflict, security, TPD. I think it's clear that there will be long-term conflict of some level or other, and that means that millions of people will remain in need of protection. Political unity is key in response to this, and I think it does relate to the question about the TPD. And you may have understood from my comments that TPD activation was crucial in having a managed response to this situation. And why did this happen in this time? I mean, it was partly because we know that there are racial and religious biases in asylum and migration policy. That's clear. Member states blocked the activation of the TPD before. It was partly to do with geographic proximity, the fact that people were being displaced from a country at the EU's borders. But I would argue it was primarily for security reasons. It was clear that not responding in an effective way to this crisis would play directly into the hands of Putin, who very well knows how to manipulate European refugee crises. So there is an argument that continued conflict may lead to a continued pragmatic and sensible protection-focused response to this crisis, because at any stage the refugee issue can be manipulated for security and military gains, and any disunity among the EU member states can be manipulated. The easiest way to generate disunity is to play with hostility towards refugees.
Thank you very much, Katrin. The security point is very well made. And Diamond, a few final words from you.
Yeah, I know we're over time and a lot has been mentioned, so I'll try to be concise. But I mean, I think if you look at housing, it's clear. I actually learned that the Troika austerity program destroyed the one social housing program that existed in Greece, and then there was then cut. So I think, like, if you look at social housing, it's an issue that if you work in migration asylum, obviously you run in constantly, and I think it's something that we need to definitely tackle. I'm very fascinated by the long-term scenarios that the panelists have been drawing out. I think there's a lot to learn from that. On the temporary protection directive, I think the one thing that we can learn from that is that we should also look at the governance and potentially think about maybe if decisions can be taken differently. Obviously, if this is not just a council directive, but actually a European Union directive, then we could potentially think about whether we need unanimity, and that's a discussion anyways now, because we can see that in many areas unanimity is actually harmful. And so if we could actually trigger the temporary protection status for other countries more easy without having a single country block it, I think that could be also helpful. And then just as a last point on the business, just because the question was asked if we should help after the war, I think it has already been clear in the answers, we need to help now. Yeah? So the current monthly deficit in Ukraine of the public sector is around 5 billion. So you can imagine what kind of need there are. I think the inflation rate is currently at 25, going to 30%, unemployment at around 30%, with whole sectors of the economy wiped out, like the steel industry and others. And so I think it's absolutely clear that given the sectoral approach of like trying to understand, in which areas we help, how economic support needs to come now, and what we have provided so far from the European Union side is definitely not sufficient.
Thank you very much. Excellent points. So my very last task is to thank all of you for the 4 panelists and the audience. Clearly, this was an unprecedented asylum crisis in Europe, an unprecedented European response, but I think our discussion brought some hope that we will learn the lessons and we will be able to meet the many challenges that our great panelists discussed. So thank you very much. Thank you.